$36 billion changed hands in 1998 to merge two car companies, and 9 years later, the buyer paid $7.4 billion just to walk away from what was left. If your retirement portfolio held any broad index fund during that stretch, you owned a piece of that evaporation, a loss that didn't show up as a line item but sat quietly inside your annual return, compounding in the wrong direction. The mechanism that destroyed the value wasn't a recession, wasn't a scandal, wasn't a foreign competitor. It was a single comparison. One car seat measured against another car seat in a conference room that quietly rewrote the engineering standards of every vehicle the company built for the next 2 decades. No memo announced it. No press release explained it. No one outside that room was supposed to notice. Daimler-Benz and Chrysler called it a merger of equals, and the man who engineered it, Chairman Jürgen Schrempp, told the world both companies would keep their identities intact. Until Mercedes-Benz became a brand that couldn't beat a Chevrolet in a reliability ranking. I had this story half written under a different angle, a straightforward luxury brand erosion piece. Then I found the Kerkorian lawsuit filing and the Schrempp interview where he admitted what the merger actually was, and it changed the whole frame. This isn't about a car company that stumbled. It's about a company that traded away the one thing its customers were actually paying for, did it deliberately, and then tried to buy it back at a markup. If you bought a car in the late 1980s or early 1990s, you remember something specific about visiting a Mercedes dealership. You didn't test drive first. You closed the door. That sound, a dense mechanical thunk that no Chrysler, no Ford, no Oldsmobile on the lot could match, told you everything before the engine started. The panel gaps were tighter than anything else in the showroom. The paint sat differently. You were paying for the engineering that produced that sound, and you knew it, and so did Mercedes. 2 questions worth sitting with before we go further. First, if the company that defined automotive quality can quietly gut its own standards for a decade without most buyers noticing until the reliability surveys catch up, what does that say about the quality controls protecting any premium product you're paying extra for right now? Second, if the same CEO can announce he's abandoning volume to chase exclusivity, then abandon exclusivity to chase volume 3 years later, and both times the stock moves, who exactly is the strategy for? If the answer to either question makes you uneasy about what the companies behind your holdings are actually building, subscribe. One documented story like this every week, following the money until it stops moving. The reason that door closed differently in 1990 and doesn't today was decided in a Stuttgart boardroom in 1998 by a man who had already made up his mind about who would run everything. The seat on the table. Daimler-Benz committed $36 billion to acquire Chrysler in May 1998, more than twice NASA's entire annual budget that year, enough to buy every house sold in metropolitan Stuttgart for a decade. Chairman Jürgen Schrempp pitched the deal as industrial logic: combine 2 manufacturers with almost no product overlap, share parts across a combined 4.4 million vehicles annually instead of Mercedes' 500,000, and let Chrysler's lean manufacturing discipline make German factories cheaper to run. When the merged Daimler-Chrysler stock began trading that November, it climbed past $108 a share. For 18 months, the arithmetic looked unassailable. What the arithmetic actually required was Mercedes engineers sitting across a table from Chrysler engineers and confronting a question Stuttgart had never today asked: which of our parts cost too much? That question produced a moment people inside both companies still describe. Chrysler's team reviewed the bill of materials for a Mercedes E-Class seat and flagged it as wildly overpriced compared to their own components. Mercedes' benchmarking division responded by purchasing a Chrysler 300M seat and disassembling it piece by piece. What they found reportedly left them staring at the table. But cost pressure doesn't respect the direction it's supposed to flow. You don't yet know this, but the benchmarking process that started with that single seat comparison would quietly spread across every Mercedes model line over the next several years. And by the time its effects became measurable in independent reliability data, no one at DaimlerChrysler would be willing to name the moment it began. Meanwhile, somewhere in Stuttgart, a buyer was walking into a dealer to order the redesigned 1998 S-Class, Mercedes' flagship, packed with more onboard electronics than any model before it. That buyer chose Mercedes specifically because the three-pointed star meant the car would never let them down. They didn't know that the air suspension system under that car was already engineered to a different cost equation than the one that built the reputation they were paying for. Within 3 years, they'd be facing repair invoices their warranty barely covered, for a suspension that failed and a dashboard display that simply stopped responding. The engineering credibility they had paid a premium for had already been traded away in a merger boardroom. They just hadn't received the bill yet. Before the merger, Mercedes had already shown the first crack. The A-Class, the company's first genuinely small, genuinely cheap car, launched in 1997 to strong reviews. 6 weeks later, a Swedish magazine called Teknikens Värld put it through a routine moose avoidance swerve at 37 miles per hour. The car rolled onto its side. A Trabant, the widely mocked East German runabout that had become a punchline across Western Europe, ran the identical test moments later and stayed upright. Mercedes suspended sales, recalled 2,500 units already delivered, and retrofitted 17,000 more. The total repair bill exceeded $300 million. But the moose test wasn't the disease. It was the first visible symptom of a company expanding faster than its own standards could follow. Supplier Bosch, which built the electronic stability system Mercedes rushed into the A-Class as a fix, would eventually ship over 300 million units worldwide, an entire safety industry born from one car that couldn't stay upright. The culture clashes inside DaimlerChrysler made the cost pressure worse. German and American teams argued over whether a meeting had produced a binding decision or a friendly conversation. Efficiency gains that justified the merger's price tag stalled while executives debated who actually controlled what. The merger of equals framing was dissolving, and the 11 days before Schrempp's own interview admission would formalize what everyone inside already knew. What the surveys found. By 2003, Consumer Reports and J.D. Power were both flagging a wave of new Mercedes models for electronics failures, air suspension breakdowns, and interior components that felt cheaper than the sticker price promised. The redesigned S-Class, the car that was supposed to showcase Mercedes' technological leadership, became the source of years of owner complaints. A family that had stretched to buy one wasn't reading industry surveys. They were standing in a service bay watching a technician explain that the air suspension replacement would cost $4,200 out of pocket on a car they'd owned for less than 4 years. Set the numbers aside for a moment. I'll be honest, I didn't expect the number to be this specific. A Mercedes E-Class owner in 2004 who financed at dealer rates and then faced 2 major electronic repairs in the first 36 months was paying roughly $340 a month more than they'd budgeted. Not in the car payment, but in the gap between what they expected to spend on maintenance and what the car actually demanded. That's a grocery bill. That's a prescription refill. That's the exact kind of cost that doesn't show up in any merger presentation, but lands on a kitchen table every month. And the engineering credibility that was supposed to prevent that cost had already been quietly bargained away in a room those owners would never see. the record shows something different from what Stuttgart was telling analysts. Schrempp called DaimlerChrysler a merger of equals. The reality was that Schrempp later admitted in a published interview he had always intended to run the combined company. A statement blunt enough to trigger a lawsuit from Chrysler investor Kerkorian, who argued shareholders had been deliberately misled about the deal's true structure. The $36 billion merger ended in May 2007, with Daimler selling Chrysler to private equity firm Cerberus Capital for roughly $7.4 billion. Daimler essentially paid to escape its own acquisition. The premium that Mercedes buyers had covered with every purchase, the margin that funded the engineering that made the door close the way it did, had been redirected for 9 years into a partnership that produced nothing Mercedes kept. If the company that built its reputation on never compromising could quietly redefine what compromise meant for nearly a decade, and you'd have no way of knowing until the reliability surveys caught up, subscribe. That gap between what you're told and what the data shows is exactly what this channel exists to document. Then, in 2005, Mercedes-Benz posted its first quarterly loss in 10 years. The causes were listed plainly: rising costs from the Chrysler integration and mounting quality problems the independent data had already identified. For a brand whose entire value rested on being the car that never failed, a financial loss driven partly by its own engineering retreat was something the company's own history had no precedent for. The memo from Chrysler benchmarking existed. It hadn't changed anything yet, but the door had already closed differently, and 300,000 owners already knew it. The pendulum's price. Ola Källenius became CEO of what was now simply Mercedes-Benz Group in 2019 and inherited the consequences of both the Chrysler decade and the volume expansion that followed it. Mercedes-Benz had spent the years after the Chrysler divestiture rebuilding. By 2010, J.D. Power ranked it third among all nameplates sold in America, and service satisfaction scores led the entire premium segment in Germany. But the instinct that caused the original damage never actually left. It just went quiet, then resurfaced as bigger touchscreens, more badge variants, cheaper interior trim hidden behind ambient lighting, and an expanding lineup of compact crossovers engineered to hit price points rather than durability benchmarks. This is not a new story. In November 2022, Consumer Reports ranked Mercedes-Benz dead last among 24 major automakers for predicted reliability, behind Chevrolet, behind Jeep, behind Tesla. 25 years after a Swedish journalist tipped an A-Class onto its side on live television, the company that invented the automobile had become the industry's least reliable brand by one major measure. The signal was there. It had been there for some time. Källenius responded with what looked like a complete reversal. In 2022, he announced Mercedes would stop competing for volume entirely. Entry-level models would shrink from 7 to 4. Investment would pour into Maybach, AMG, the G-Class, and a new ultra-exclusive line called Mythos, collectible six-figure vehicles sold to a handful of buyers. For 1 year, it appeared to work. Fewer cars at higher prices pushed operating margin to 16.4% in 2022. Then the margin started falling. 12.6% in 2023, 4.8% by the third quarter of 2024. Mercedes adjusted EBIT for 2025 came in at 8.2 billion euros, down from 13.7 billion the year before, a collapse of 40% in a single fiscal year. Group revenues fell from 145.6 billion euros to 132.2 billion.
China, once Mercedes' fastest-growing market, dropped nearly a fifth in 1 year as domestic rivals like BYD and Xiaomi closed the technology gap while charging far less. The ultra-luxury EQS electric sedan barely registered there at all. The board had the reliability data and the China sales trajectory for 6 weeks before the next strategy presentation. No one in the room asked to revisit the assumptions underlying the exclusivity pivot. Källenius made the decision to abandon volume and chase ultra-luxury. $340 a month, the gap that landed on kitchen tables in 2004, is almost exactly the per-unit margin Mercedes lost when Chinese buyers stopped paying the premium. The people who absorbed the cost of the quality decline and the people who absorbed the cost of the strategy reversal were never the people in the boardroom. They were owners, retirees holding the stock in index funds, and the roughly 4,000 German employees who accepted severance packages under a restructuring plan that began in April 2024, with senior managers eligible for up to 500,000 euros and a 55-year-old team leader with 30 years of service walking out with a check and no desk to return to. Mercedes' own target? 30,000 voluntary departures and 5 billion euros in cost cuts by 2027, a billion of it from personnel. CEO Källenius set those terms. The workers lived with them. This pattern isn't exclusive to Stuttgart. GM took a $6 billion charge in 2024 for pulling back from EV investments after overshooting production targets. Ford revealed a $19.5 billion write-down for canceling multiple electric vehicle programs. Toyota quietly walked back its own EV timeline, calling previous targets benchmarks rather than targets. Volvo abandoned its pledge to go all-electric by 2030. If you hold shares in any automaker through a broad index or a consumer discretionary fund, you hold exposure to the same oscillation. A company committing publicly to one direction, then reversing when the quarterly numbers arrive, and each reversal costing more than the last. By August 2025, Källenius told reporters Mercedes had never really called it a luxury strategy at all. In 2022, his own communications had framed it as building the world's most desirable cars, cutting entry-level models, pouring capital into Maybach and the Mythos line, explicitly abandoning volume competition. 3 years later, the company was already doing the opposite, planning dozens of new models across every price point, reviving the A-Class for a projected 2027 return. The CEO who said Mercedes would stop chasing volume was now chasing volume again, using almost the identical language from 1997, an entry point for a new generation, repackaged for a new decade. Verdict. Källenius's admission in August 2025 that Mercedes had never really called it a luxury strategy landed publicly, exactly as the company's adjusted EBIT confirmed the 40% profit decline that made the denial necessary. The strategy he was disowning had been announced, named, funded, and defended for 3 consecutive years. The convergence of the denial and the financial evidence is now part of the public record. I've stopped assuming a board reviewed what it voted to fund. This is why. 3 patterns emerge from this specific history, and none of them are comfortable. 1. Mercedes didn't fail because it made bad cars. It failed because it let a cost comparison exercise, one seat, one conference room, become the operating logic for an entire product line, and no one with the authority to stop it treated the comparison as a threat rather than an opportunity. The benchmarking process that began with a Chrysler 300M seat didn't announce itself as a quality reduction. It arrived as efficiency. It arguments does. 2. The cure replicated the disease. Källenius's exclusivity pivot and Schrempp's volume expansion look like opposite strategies.
They share the same zeal. Both required Mercedes to become something it wasn't, on a timeline its engineering culture couldn't support, funded by margins extracted from buyers who trusted the badge more than the balance sheet behind it.
Swinging from mass market to ultra-luxury and back within 5 years isn't a strategy. It's the absence of one. 3. The company that invented the modern automobile now competes in a market where a 50 Attorney General diesel emissions settlement costs $149.7 million, where the warranty class action judgment in Hazdovac versus Mercedes-Benz USA received final court approval on June 25, 2026, and where the gap between what the star promises and what the car delivers is now measured quarterly by institutions that will not look away. Mercedes-Benz still sells 303,000 cars a year in the United States. The G-Class posted a 23% sales increase in 2025. The engineering talent is still in Stuttgart. The documents are public. Draw your own conclusions. If the company that invented the standard can quietly abandon it, and the people paying the premium are always the last to find out, what exactly are you paying for?